Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining Palmdale Water District's Let's Talk H2O. This is our first event of the year. We started these last year to talk about important subjects for our area. We kind of got sidelined by the COVID event, but we're trying it again this year in a virtual way. So bear with us, and we hope you've learned something today. And I also noticed in the list of people who registered for this, there are a number of people who aren't in this area. So just to step back a little bit and get you familiar with where we're at, Palmdale is in the northeast part of LA County on the northern foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains. Our district boundaries are adjacent to the Angeles National Forest and the San Gabriel Mountains National Monument. And before we get too far, I think when this event was advertised, we talked about the first 25 people who registered and attended today would be given our 100th anniversary book. So I want to assure you that that will happen. Today's subject is about the Bobcat fire and what effect it has on a local valuable water resource for the area. I will start with an overview of the Bobcat fire and Littlerock Dam and Reservoir, a little bit of history there. And then I'll turn it over later to Scott Rogers, who's our engineering grant manager. He'll discuss some of the specific actions that we've already taken and will take in the future. Once we get to the end of the presentation, there will be a chance for questions, which can be written in through the chat feature in this program. Now, getting started. The Bobcat fire is the second biggest fire in the Angeles National Forest behind the station fire from 2009. Here are some of the facts about the Bobcat fire. It started on the the south end of the San Gabriel Mountains near Cogswell Reservoir. Burnt for just about a month and a half north, all the way up into the Antelope Valley, into the Juniper Hills area. Most of that area is part of the San Gabriel National Monument, and there were about 115,000 acres burnt with this fire. And a lot of the area, especially in the upper Little Rock watershed, hadn't burnt for a good 50 years. So why does that affect Palmdale Water District? Littlerock Reservoir's watershed is about 64 square miles up into the San Gabriels, and 60% of that burnt in the Bobcat fire. As far as we know, that's the most damage to the watershed since Littlerock Dam was first built. Our general worries about that is the increased sedimentation that'll come into the reservoir and then changes to the water quality. A little bit of history about Littlerock Dam. It was first put together as a project in 1918, along with our neighboring district, the Little Rock Creek Irrigation District. Actually propelled Palmdale to become a public agency to work with Little Rock and get better financing for the construction. The dam was completed in 1924 and remained substantially the same until the early 90s, when it had to be strengthened, and then we also raised it to be compliant with the Department of Safety of Dams requirements. When the dam was first built, it had a capacity of about 4,200 acre feet. Of course, at that time, there was no sediment behind the dam. When we did the work in the 90s, it had all sedimented, or the sediment had built up to the point where there was only 1,700 acre foot of storage left in the reservoir. So part of the project in the early 90s, in addition to strengthening the dam, was raising the spillway, so we got up to about 3,500 acre foot of capacity. At about that time, we removed about 2 years worth of material to build some of the recreational facilities there, but we weren't allowed to do any more because of the discovery of the arroyo toad in the area that we've spent probably a good 25 years dealing with all the issues with to be able to start the work that we've done in the last couple of years. And why is it important to our customers? You know, the runoff from that 64 square miles is brought into the Littlerock Reservoir, and then we transfer it to Lake Palmdale, about 8 miles to the northwest, and it becomes one of our 3 major sources for our customers. On average, it provides 10% of our water supply. Last year, because of a wet winter in Southern California, that provided 22% of our water supply. Our other water sources are, you can see Lake Palmdale in the background. That's a holding reservoir for water from Littlerock Reservoir and from the State Water Project. We're a direct contractor for the State Water Project. And then our other source is groundwater in the Antelope Valley. So last fall, when the Bobcat fire burnt through 60% of the watershed for Littlerock. In the upper end of the watershed, where it's much steeper and hadn't burnt for a good 50 years, 56% of that area burnt. And then the lower part where the slopes are a little less steep, about 38% of that area burnt. Based on this information, the USGS provided a map on the next slide that shows the potential for debris flows from these burn areas. As you can see, the upper part of the watershed in the lower right corner or end of the slide is where the biggest amount is expected to happen. And then lesser amounts as you get to the northwest where the reservoir really is. As you can see, the estimates are pretty high for the impact to the reservoir if there are significant rain events. And then the other concern that the district has, I mentioned earlier, is water quality. You know, there's obviously going to be more material that can get washed into the reservoir, and that water is going to be have a lot more sediment, a lot more turbidity, a lot more carbon in it than normal. And what that means to the district is we'll have to monitor that and then move it, as we move it to Palmdale Lake to be treated, we'll have to keep an eye on that water quality and possibly blend some with the State Water Project. But it will likely increase our treatment cost, increase our monitoring costs just to stay atop or ahead of the needs for treatment there, so we know what's coming to the treatment plant. In the end, though, the water that we serve our customers will still meet all standards, and they should not see an effect from this. Now, with that, I'll move on to Scott Rogers, our engineering grant manager, who's done a great job working on various projects for the district. And he's got this response well under control. So Scott?
Thanks, Dennis. I need to unmute myself. So I'm going to talk about kind of what the engineering group is doing as far as addressing the Bobcat fire. So the first thing that we did is initially staff met with the U.S. Forest Service. They gave us kind of their review of how the impact of the fire on the forest. And after meeting with them, they recommended that we look at starting the sediment removal sooner. Under the governor's emergency declaration, we're able to put out this emergency sediment removal project. Currently, the contractor that we hired and contracted with at the end of January is now on their second week of removal. They are expecting to remove a total of 19,000 cubic yards by the end of next week. This will help us prepare, for potential debris flow from the Bobcat fire. And sediment is, it occurs naturally in a stream flow. It's typically small particles similar to sand that will naturally flow down the creek. But when you get a fire, you get a lot of ash. And so we're expecting, and based on what the USGS has determined through their debris flow modeling, is that it's going to significantly impact the reservoir. So this project is to kind of address that in a very quick fashion so that we're prepared for that. Here's a current picture. This was taken last week. The picture on the left, that's looking up the valley or upstream of Littlerock Creek. You can see that orange fencing kind of through the middle of the picture. That is the fencing that we are using, or the contractor is using, to keep the arroyo toad out of the construction area. Also, you can see part of the grade control structure that the district built back and completed back in 2019. There, it's like a little bit of concrete you can kind of see at the bottom of the picture. On the right-hand picture, you can see our contractors working on excavating material. There's some trucks there, and there's an excavator sitting on top of a large sediment pile. And those trucks are hauling that material to a local quarry for disposal. The contractor also has to complete the project by a specific time of March 15th, where we have another sensitive species called the least Bell's vero, which is a bird. They typically nest mid-March. So since it's a sensitive species, we can't be doing any construction when they're nesting. So the contractor will be complete with the project by March 15th. This slide, this is just kind of an overview of the overall phases of the project. The overall objective is to restore, like Dennis said, the 1992 water storage volume of the reservoir to the 3,500 acre feet. And the dam is also used for flood control downstream of the dam. So it's an important project, not only for the district, but also for the surrounding community. The first phase of the project was the grade control structure that I previously mentioned. And you can see that on the picture on the left. Grade control structure is used to safely drop water from one elevation to another without, causing the soil to, erode at the bottom. It's kind of like a control structure. It's also used to protect the arroyo toad's habitat upstream. So upstream, which is on the left-hand side of the project, of the grade control structure that you see there. That would be the arroyo habitat, and below that is the district's reservoir. So that whole project's total purpose was so that we can go in there and start performing the sediment removal. You can go to the next slide. So this is the emergency sediment removal portion. This is phase 2, what we're calling phase 2. And the overall objective is to remove 1.1 million cubic yards of accumulated sediment over a 7 to 12 year period. Phase 2 is going to start later this year, where we'll remove anywhere from 100 to 200 cubic yards of material per year. And again, like I mentioned before, that's to get us to that 3,500 acre feet of water storage volume. The approximate cost of the total project over that 7 or 12 year period is $32 million. And then once we've completed that removal of that 1.1 million cubic yards, we estimate that we'll have to do annually every year 38,000 cubic yards to maintain the storage volume. The district is also working with the United States Geographical Survey, which is what I've been referring to as USGS. The district is partnering with USGS over a 4-year period to study the impacts of the fire on the reservoir. The USGS is predicting that the fire will negatively start impacting the reservoir in over a 3-year period. So they're going to study the reservoir and the sediment that's coming into the reservoir over the next 3 years. And they're going to be doing that by installing a time-lapse camera that's going to be observing the debris flow. So the camera will be pointed upstream to, take time-lapse photos of the creek flow as it's flowing into the reservoir. Those time-lapse photos will be able to be downloaded by the district, and we're hoping that we can share that with the public so they can kind of see how the debris flow is going to impact the reservoir. So we'll hopefully do that on the PWD website, and so be on the lookout for that. Again, also the studies will also look at how the sediment's accumulating. So they will take like a contours of how the reservoir is starting to be filled by sediment. So they'll do that in the spring to kind of get a general idea of where we're starting at, and then the fall. The main objective of that is, for at least from a Palmdale Water District standpoint, is to really determine how much accumulation we're receiving behind the dam. That will allow us to make sure that, and also compare that to, is 38,000 cubic yards of annual removal, is that going to be enough for us? So that will give us a good idea of where we stand with that. The USGS will also publish that in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. And then also the USGS is going to put a water quality sampler in the Littlerock Creek just upstream of the grade control structure to monitor what kind of chemicals are being introduced into the creek through the debris, through the soot and ash that's from the fire. So they'll be able to determine that, and then that we'll also be able to have that data to see how the water quality in the reservoir changes through that 3-year or 4-year period. Next slide. That ends my presentation. Dennis and I are happy to answer any of your questions.
Yes, so there are some questions. The first one is there an estimated recovery time for either watershed?
If you're talking about the natural environment, bushes, trees growing back, that's hard to say because that's also contingent on precipitation. The one thing that the Forest Service has done is it's closed down the Los Angeles National Forest through April 1st of 2020. So I think their main objective there is to allow kind of nature to take its course and try to recover from that wildfire event.
Great, thank you. Next question is, will the project have any impacts on the road traffic flow around the area radius? Also, will the reservoir be closed to hikers?
Dennis, do you want to take that one or you want me to? Me? Okay. Like I mentioned, the Forest Service has closed the National Forest through April 1st of 2022, which also does include the Littlerock Creek recreational area. So the area is closed. As far as traffic, with regards to, assume they're talking about truck traffic. That will be dependent on where the sediment's being taken to. But, obviously local roads like Treesboro will be probably the primary road that truck traffic will use till they get to Pure Blossom or Highway 138. It just depends on, where the end location of the sediment's going to be. So hopefully that answers that question.
Great. Next question is, how long will the fire affect our quality of water?
I'm allowed to talk now. So would you like me to take that one, Scott?
It's all you.
All right. It's really unknown. It depends on how much rainfall or precipitation we get, and how fast that comes and how long it'll take. But our experience from the station fire about 12 years ago is it took nearly 10 years for the carbon, total organic carbon in the water to go back to more normal levels.
Thank you. Next one is, what happened to the arroyo toad?
The arroyo toad is, as far as we know, still healthy and has a decent population south of the dam up in the watershed. Their existence in that area is why we've done all this work for the last 25 some years. And like Scott pointed out, the reason we have the fence to protect or keep them from coming into construction areas at this point.
Great, thank you. Is it not possible to place containment and settlement structures to the south of the reservoir area to assist in sediment containment until the reservoir is completely filled?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Let me repeat it. Is it not possible to place containment and settlement structures to the south of the reservoir area to assist in sediment containment until the reservoir is completely filled? It might be more about like a structure thing. I can move on.
Well, let me maybe address that a little bit. It sounds like the question is, should we let the reservoir fill up with sediment and then catch additional sediment downstream from the dam. That whole idea was talked through or worked through as an alternate for the environmental work that was done to be able to do the sediment removal project, not the emergency one now, but the long-term one that Scott described. And that's just not a feasible way to handle sediment or to address the water supply for our customers.
Okay. Next question is, if SCE is determined to be at fault for the start of the fire, will Palmdale Water District seek compensation from them?
I don't think we can really comment on that at this point. We have put letters in or notice into various organizations to see if there's any money that could be available to help us with this work. But I'm not sure how that traces back or if it will trace back to Southern California Edison.
Great. Next question is, why did the U.S. Forest Service close the forest?
Well, as I previously mentioned, I think the Forest Service, wants the area to recover, and, keeping people out of it allows nature to kind of help reestablish itself. But the Forest Service's order is on the U.S. Forest Service website, and you can download that from their website.
Okay, thank you. Somebody asked, have you seen an arroyo toad recently?
I personally have not.
I have not either.
Thank you. Is the state providing assistance via grant to pay for the project?
I can answer that one if you want. Yes, the state is providing some funding for the project. It's not a lot, but will probably get us, at least a good portion for the first year. Currently, we have been granted a grant through the Integrated Regional Water Management Group through the Antelope Valley. We're one of the projects, and that is sediment removal is one of those projects that got awarded. So, yes.
Great, thank you. One more question is there any areas where volunteers can assist with conservation efforts?
I'll try that one. As far as, I'm not sure what the idea of conservation is. At some point for getting the area ready again for recreation, I think, we'd be happy to have help from the community to do that, but that's going to be probably over a year away from now, based on the closure.
Okay, and then one last question that came in is, when will the Littlerock Dam reopen?
Let me take that.
Sure.
Okay. I think most of the local people are aware that the area has been shut down by the Forest Service since about this time in 2015. That closure had nothing to do with a fire or anything else. It had to do with the ability to run the recreational area. The Forest Service is still dealing with that. I know that they're trying to put something or somebody in place over the next couple of years so that when the hopefully when the order is from the closure order from the fire is lifted, there will be the opportunity to have somebody in there to have some limited access for the public in between the times that the sediment will be hauled out.
Okay, one last two-part question is, will this slide deck be available after today's presentation?
That was a good segue because I was supposed to say that pretty soon. This will be posted on the Palmdale Water District website after today's session is over.
And Dennis, somebody is commenting on the beautiful painting on the wall behind you on the left, on your left shoulder. Do you want to know who the artist is?
I would have to look that up. It was a gift, so I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's supposed to be from Wyoming.
Okay, great. Thank you. Those were all the questions.
All right. Thank you all for attending. Appreciate you taking the time to be here and ask a good series of questions. If you have more questions that you like to email in and get answers to, feel free to do that. I think you have all the contact information to do that. And as we close, there will be a brief video courtesy of our drone team here at the district of the area just south of the reservoir. Again, thank you for coming today.
Thank you.